Hello, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful session on climate change and water from a South Asian perspective. I'm representing the Global Research Network today. My name is Alexander Stingel. I am the Senior Fellow for the Climate and Energy think tank, where we do some interesting work on the food, water, energy nexus. I am very, very fortunate and lucky to work with a group of amazing junior fellows who organize events like today's. The junior fellow who organized this event and who will also moderate most of today's session is Gayatri Naik, who works on water policy mainly, but not only, who is an amazingly inspiring person who, again, I can only say I'm very, very lucky to be able to work with her in the GRN. So the GRN, very, very briefly, is an organization, a network, a group that does its best to support early career scholars and researchers and scholars and researchers who are not well represented in the traditional university system, in the traditional research institutes. As we all know, realistically, these traditional pathways for careers and jobs are somewhat declining in terms of number, however, certainly increasing in need for them, actually, which means scholarship, research, activism are things, policy advice, helping the public not only be heard, but also find solutions. These are things that require more and more connections, networking opportunities outside of the university. And the GRN is an organization that tries to make it possible, especially for young early career people, to find ways of contributing, to find ways also of making a living, and also to bring people together, to bring publics together, to bring decision makers together with scholars, and to find ways of communicating together to create a better future. Water, obviously, is one of the critical fulcrum points in the future of this planet, the future for many, many societies and communities. It is incredibly contested, access to things like fresh water. Who gets it? How is it used? Who, in a sense, gets to pollute it? As powerful industries often simply seem to have the right to pollute, and to pollute in areas where poorer people live, people who have less power to defend themselves against this pollution. Recently, an interesting, wonderful book was published, wonderful in the sense how it was written, terrible in what it addresses, that pollution is a form of colonialism, or pollution is colonialism. So we're also dealing with the critical legacies of imperialism and colonialism with regard to today's questions of water rights. Today we have a panel where an interesting and important issue is addressed from an academic, political, activist, public side, or sides, with two great speakers. And I think the question is if water governance, how is water to be governed? How is it, however, governed from top to bottom, or are there regional regulations possible from bottom upwards? How are we dealing with these kinds of questions? How can we come together and find better solutions for this? How can people really find their ways of being part of the decisions and of the generation of solutions for this governance problem? And we have two speakers who will give us an introduction and debate, and then we open for the public that is part of this to have their questions to these experts and discuss with them. So our first speaker is an associate professor at the Faculty of Legal Studies at South Asian University. That is Dr. Stellina Jolie. She has a PhD in legal studies from Punjab University. She was a Fulbright Fellow, Fulbright Scholar at the University of San Francisco, visiting research associate with the Center for Emerging Countries in Private International Law at the University of Johannesburg. Among many other things, she's written on domestic violence. She's written on understanding the legal consequences of granting personhood to natural entities in India. As we know, there's famous cases of rivers and valleys having been given personhood in a legal sense. She has written about a linking human rights approach to access to water, transboundary issues. She's written on many important legal problems, and she will talk to us about them with regard to water governance. Our second speaker, Mr. Siddiqui, he is an environment and developmental law practitioner and legal consultant, founding partner of the Indian Environment Law Organization, IELO, a law firm based in Delhi. He specializes in water law and worked on improving the policy, legal, and institutional frameworks on water governance, on not only the national, but also the subnational level, meaning how can communities contribute, how are communities affected, what kind of laws and legal representations have in India. He has been engaged with transboundary water rights, and he will give us, in addition to the research, also a very practitioner's perspective, and I think our two speakers will come wonderfully together on that. So I now give it over. I shut up almost for good in this panel, and I give it over to Dr. Stellina Jolly, and I am very, very eager to learn from all of you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Alexander, for the kind introduction, and very good morning and good afternoon to everyone, whichever the time zones you are in. So, first of all, let me thank Alexander and Gayatri for inviting me to share my thoughts on a very, very pertinent topic especially to South Asia. So today I will be concentrating my talk with regard to the transboundary water governance. I'll take Indus case based in the Indus Water Treaty as a template to discuss its interlinkage with the climate change. But I think I should start with a caveat since I'm a researcher and academician. So I think I bring maybe a research and academic perspective. But Shawahiq is my co-panelist who has done very, very extensive work at the community level. And I'm sure he will be bringing a lot of the wide experiences basis, I think, which is very, very important in terms of evolving, as Alexander rightly said, a bottom-up approach, because which at least currently at the regional level or at the numerous the transboundary agreements which the South Asian countries have signed, which is lacking. So I think I can share I'm not able to share. So if you can, I think, give me the screen rights. Okay. So is this PPT visible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So couple of basic facts. I don't think that we need much more elaborations with regard to the interlinkage of climate change and its consequences on water resources. That's very well documented and researched and reported by IPCC and other studies. And especially with regard to South Asia, we are also witnessing much disasters, whether it is in the form of unprecedented floods or the cloud burst or a glacial melt. So it's the written, whatever it is witnessing, it's all over the linkage, which is even visible for even a layman. So if I look at it from the context of South Asia falls among the regions which is very, very vulnerable to climate change. And if you analyze that vulnerability, it is very intricately tied to its topography, geography, and also the developmental needs, and also its connection with the poverty aspects. And specifically with regard to the water context, if you look at the data and the reports, it definitely suggests that the South Asia as the jurisdiction falls under extremely high to extremely high water stressed areas, with Pakistan and Afghanistan actually topping the list. So this scenario, water scarcity, becomes much complicated given the fact that South Asia has a very, very fair, good share of transboundary water issues, whether it is between India and Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, India and Nepal, and also Pakistan and Afghanistan, though the water sharing issues between in Pakistan and Afghanistan is often neglected. But yes, the point is that most of the South Asian countries does have transboundary issues between them. And in some transboundary basins, we may have an agreement, but there are basins where we don't have any clear-cut legal framework. So if I take in this particular scenario, as I said, okay, I'll be taking Indus as a template to see that whether this 1960 agreement, or for that matter, any transboundary agreements which is operating in South Asia, is it resilient, or are they enough to tackle the climate change, the threats, or the uncertainty the climate change brings? So in this context, it's interesting to see in August 2021, one of the Parliamentary Standing Committee of the Government of India has recommended to the Government of India that they should renegotiate the Indus Water Treaty with Pakistan. And one of the reasons cited by the Parliamentary Standing Committee is that this Indus Treaty in the 1960 original treaty is not capable of handling the climate change challenges and also the issues of environmental issues, especially with regard to the environmental impact assessment. So this is an interesting take where, yes, a parliamentary committee has recommended that, yes, we need to modify the transboundary agreements to tackle the issue of climate change. Whether the government of India and government of Pakistan will sit down and start diplomatic negotiations on this, that's definitely, I think it's interesting to see. For me, and I think most of the experts will agree that right now that scenario appears slightly bleak, because even this agreement in the current form as a result of a tripartite negotiate. So I don't know whether we are in the right page to start new negotiations. But given that uncertainty, what we are trying to see is that the Indus Water Treaty in the existing form, is it capable of handling the climate change issues? If you look at the Indus Water Agreement, all of us agree that this is not exactly a water sharing agreement as you normally see in a transboundary agreements. This is in fact a division of or a partition of the rivers, where the eastern rivers went to India and western rivers went to Pakistan. But of course, whether it is the western rivers, the India has been given the right to use it for irrigation and hydroelectricity power. The same has been given to Pakistan over the eastern rivers. And if you look at the resilience of this treaty, definitely it's a very successful treaty, withstanding even the political equations and even 2 wars between the nations. And it has an institutional framework. And with the Kishanganga arbitration, the final award, it has successfully proved that it has a very effective and a very robust dispute resolution mechanism. But when it comes to the issues of environmental, especially the ecological balance and also the climate change, if you look at the current, the framework of the Indus Water Treaty, it does have certain concerns. It's not a limitations of the 1960 treaty, because 1960, even at the international level, environmental issues were something which is open oblivious to that. So it's just was making a beginning. So it's not exactly the limitation or a drawbacks of that treaty, because at that, I think every treaty has, whenever it is framed, it is influenced by the political and socio and whatever the legal structure existing at that time. So definitely the Indus Water Agreement does not have anything to talk in terms of specifically the climate change. And more importantly, does not have an obligation to maintain a certain amount of water flow for ecological purposes. And there are very few provisions which talks about the quality of water or the control of pollutions. So in terms of the quality, sedimentations, and the pollution aspect, or the ecological balances or a biodiversity, so that particular treaty has very less to offer. And it is in this context, if you look at or include the specter of climate change, this becomes. So one of the most important characteristics of climate change is its uncertainty. Especially, and that is equally applicable in the context of the water resources, whether it is in terms of a disaster or a flood. So specifically, if you look at the Indus as the treaty, so there is a 3-river which is given to India and 3-river which is given to Pakistan. See, especially when uncertainty is the characteristic feature of climate change, it's very difficult to think of a scenario where a particular water treaty, which is intended to be for a permanent in nature, which is intended to stand for 15 or 20 years. So when we are not exactly sure whether, like, okay, there will be a water shortage in the eastern rivers, or is there any excess water going to be there in the western rivers. So I'm talking about the uncertainty in terms of the water availability in that. So when there is an uncertainty with regard to whether it is the rainfall or overall availability of water, so it's not just with regard to the Indus Water Treaty, but when any transboundary agreement is confronted with climate change, the scholars are of the opinion that this sort of agreement, which we normally look at as a positive side in a legal framework, that's of a permanent nature, that becomes a problematic. So the answer lies to this uncertainty, maybe in terms of invoking or bringing flexible mechanism, flexibility in terms of allocation, flexibility in terms of the institutional mechanism, or even in terms of changing or bringing the basic amendments. So the answer, I think, if you look at the existing water treaties, the answer could be there in bringing the maximum flexibility. Of course, like, in bringing any kind of a flexibility, especially in a very highly politically volatile context like India and Pakistan, it requires a tremendous amount of political will. But if you look at across the world, some of the practices, especially, I can take the Colorado. Not that the Colorado is politically, it can be equated in the context of Indus Water Treaty. But if you look at the Colorado Agreement between US and Mexico from 1922, the Compact, and the 1944 Treaty, they have brought in some kind of a flexible mechanism, which I'm not saying that which exactly can be replicated in this context, but yeah, in order to bring the flexible mechanism, we do not require the complete amendment of it. So one of the flexible mechanism which is adopted in the context of Colorado is a very flexible amendment mechanism. So in the Colorado region, there is this thing, water commissions, where both US and Mexico is represented. So if that water commission takes a decision, whether it is regarding the construction of a particular thing, or a storage, or the controlling of pollution, or a sedimentation, so that particular decision is forwarded to the respective governments. If they do not hear an objection from their respective governments in 30 days, that particular decisions become finals and it becomes part of the implementation. So something of that can be also implemented at the Indus Water context, that we have an Indus Water Permanent Commissions, yes, which requires definitely a little bit of modifications with regard to its functioning. So, and if you look at the flexible amendment mechanism, which was in operation in the Colorado, the treaty, that treaty has the minutes, which is called as the flexible amendments, that has been very, very successful in terms of addressing the issues of pollution, salination, sedimentation. And the latest minutes, the 319 and 323, is the experts believe that they are also capable of handling the climate change, wherein they have brought very, very flexible allocations. They are allowing the Mexico to cut back on the shares or even delay taking the delivery of the water. So that, of course, will require the storage and infrastructural facilities, and they're trying to bring in a lot of joint cooperative mechanisms. So I think these are a couple of aspects where the experts and the policymakers can try to think it. Does it require a complete overhauling of Indus Water Treaty? No, it does not require an overhauling of agreement. So it can be, maybe the government can come out with an addendum saying that, okay, some kind of a flexible mechanism. They're trying to revamp the Indus Water Commission with the membership and their functioning methods. So, and also there is Article 7, I think if I remember correctly, the article number, which talks about the future cooperation. So these are a couple of the Indus Water Treaty provisions which can be leveraged to bring an amount of flexibility which is necessary to address the climate change issues. So these aspects definitely, but even if these changes or these kind of a modification does require a certain amount of political will. But along with this, I think Shawahiq must be definitely pointing out or highlighting these issues. So if you look at whether it is the Indus Water or it's the Ganges Treaty or any transboundary water agreements which is in operation in South Asia, even though none of the South Asian countries are party to the UN Watercourse Convention, all these agreements follow a kind of a top-down model. And when you realize that with the climate change, whether it is a construction of a dams in a transboundary context, that has a very immediate effect on the communities who is depending on their livelihood in that particular region. So whether it is the UN Watercourse Convention, so even if Watercourse Convention or international water law per se, it's not only anthropocentric, I think it's too state-centric. So what about the limited rights which is given to the individuals or communities? That's with regard to maybe participation or some kind of an access to information or the justice aspect. So any kind of a modifications when we talk in the context of a transboundary water governance and climate change has to take into account this community participations. And in community participation, that also could be layered with the gender components. So I think this is something where a lot of the policy attention and the research attention definitely has to obliterate or reduce that state centricism and anthropocentrism from the transboundary governance. Right now, I don't think that it is just a part of the South Asia, but even the global international water law itself is a state-centric. So I think that narrative definitely has to slowly change. Shawahiq has done, I think, excellent works with regard to the marginal rivers. I think that is also very, very important. We only talk about the major rivers, but especially if you take India and Bangladesh, almost I think 54 or 56, the rivers are shared between two countries. So I think these are a couple of aspects to ponder over. And the last point I want to highlight is the narrative on rights of rivers. Can this rights of rivers make a difference in the transboundary governance? And can it actually make a difference? Like Alexander's talked about the bottom-up approach or a community participations where the voices of the community can be heard. But can the voices of the rivers also be heard? And especially in the context of South Asia, India has declared River Ganges to be a legal person, though the Supreme Court has stayed the operation. Bangladesh has a judgment which has declared all the rivers in Bangladesh to be a legal person. So this could be a narratives or a paradigm shift. But if anything positive has to come out of this declaration of a rights of rivers, unless and until there is really an independent institutional mechanism and a really collaborative mechanism can be worked out from a community participations, even that the impact of that concept of rights of rivers also appears to be problematic right now. So I think I'll stop here. And we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So now we'll go to Siddiqui sir, then we'll go for the discussions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Gayatri. Thanks, Alexander and Stellina, for kind introductions. I'm just a people's lawyer. Any claim beyond that is as good as two Indians claiming to uncover South Asia. So, I'll probably try and reflect broadly in, I would say, three parts in three areas. So a bit of a context probably, and then let's see what are the trends emerging from the region. And after seeing the trends, let's just reflect on, how does the scenario look like when we talk about South Asia? But just to give you a bit of a context. Now, we are a complex region. And as one scholar puts it, we're logged into each other's intestine. So as a region, we are very, very complex, not only geographically, but legally as well. So when you look at from Afghanistan all the way to Pakistan, India, and Eastern Himalayas, which touch Bangladesh and Bhutan, we have a regime of special governance areas where unwritten tribal customs prevail as legislations. And you have a case where, thousands of hectares of forest are governed by these unwritten customary laws. And when I say forest, I mean catchment and rivers included. So this is a very complex region where multi-level governance exists already. However, whether it is interacting with each other is a question. And how does it correctly respond to tackling regional challenges as a whole is an interesting area to look at. So that's one, the legal complexity of South Asia. The second point is that in this region, science acknowledges that it is connected, it is contiguous. For example, we've always been talking Himalayas as one ecosystem. We've always been talking in South Asia, Indus as a system. We've been talking Ganga as a system. We have been talking Brahmaputra as a system. So mountains and rivers and the boundaries, science acknowledges it as one area. However, there's a policy disconnect. So policies do not necessarily upfront acknowledge that continuity, that connectivity, and that interdependence. There is a fragile acknowledgement in the policies that, this has to be worked in totality and so on and so forth, but that is strong message of looking at as a region or as a connectedness and governance of that connectivity is not there. So that's the second, science not talking to policy enough, or governance not talking to policy enough the way it should. The third context I would say, which is important, is that we have our own set of complex challenges which are out there. So we have a huge demography and a population to support, and we are busy in tackling too much and too little. So either we have droughts and or we have floods. So we have these scenarios in all the countries in South Asia. So we are occupied most of the time with that, and then legislations are reflection of that. So since Stockholm, we have legislated. It's not the case that South Asia hasn't been sensitive to environment. You look at the trend since 1972, we have had fantastic legislations, whether it is Nepal Environment Protection Act, whether it is Environment Protection Act of India, whether it is Bangladesh Environment Conservation Act, BECA. We have legislated in our own ways. But the 30 years, the recent 30 years of the climate era has not then been mainstreamed and included in that legislative governance. So the modernization of environment protection legislation in South Asia has really not benefited from the climate discourse since 90s that has emerged. So on one hand, intense negotiations and positioning of South Asia in the global forums on what kind of treaty it is looking forward to. And on the back end, we have really struggled hard to see how some of that climate sensitivity gets reflected into our legislations and governance. So that's bit of sets the tone for looking at what are the trends now, what is emerging. What we are seeing as practitioners is that now more and more cases are being filed on larger environmental issues. So that means good business for lawyers, but that necessarily does not mean that there is more environmental consciousness or climate consciousness. What it also reflects is that the ordinary machinery set up to tackle issues like climate change and environmental governance is grossly failing in its endeavors to regulate environment the way it should be as per the statutes. And we see issues it's not only, and most of these cases, actually, if you analyze, if you do the data analysis, what you find, a chunk of these cases relate to pollution of rivers. A chunk of these cases relate to the coast being completely overtaken, the mangroves being destroyed, coastal areas being most vulnerable to environmental disasters are simply being converted into some kind of zones, losing their natural resilience and connectivity to the sweet waters and rivers. So we have cases and issues like environmental flows have recently crept into the policy discourse. So we are seeing these trends where somehow governance is going haywire and regulatory authorities have taken a backseat. So that's one trend from the people's or from practitioners' side. The second trend that we are noticing here in South Asia, whether it is Bangladesh or India or Nepal, what we are seeing is that somehow post-2015 climate events seems to be the culmination of the climate activism that we had. And discourse post that has become more, I would say, sectoral, although focused. So there are not much policy activism or policy involvement or informed engagement of the civil society on a climate issue as a whole. We are talking REDD+, we are talking now forest governance, we are talking environmental flows, but not the way in which it was being talked and discussed during till the run up to the Paris Climate Agreement. So that's the trend from civil society which is emerging. I don't know whether it is the structure of the donor programs, it is the government receptivity, but as a whole, we're seeing the region is going almost illusioned about this whole climate era. It seems as if policies have frozen, and it is good enough to have the climate agreement 2015, and the road ahead is clear on INDCs, and we have it all, and the way forward would be able to deal with. Whereas in an environment like South Asia, you have dynamic problems. This is a churning region, and both ecologically and economically. So therefore, you need, in order to respond to dynamic problems, you need dynamic policies, and therefore a dynamic discourse of civil societies which should be there. So that's from the people side. Look at what are the trends in the government. We have set an ambitious agenda as a South. So, each country has its own ambitious agenda. So India, of course, being the larger economy, has set larger goals. Whereas no one else, I mean, all other countries are, in terms of energy consumption, in terms of trade, in terms of infrastructure development, we want to go very fast. And rightly so, with so many people to feed and to give employment. That is the trend. But then there is a trend that in the last 5 or 6 or 10 years, we have gone very fast on environmental clearances, which means we have gone very rapid on giving forests, diverting rivers. We've gone very fast in creating infrastructure without really creating safety nets in terms of environment impact assessments or social impact assessments, and seeing if people lose their job, what kind of reverse migration it is going to lead to, and what kind of impact it will have both in the country and in the region and on the ecology as a whole. The second thing that we are seeing as a policy, if you want to oversee and kind of have an overview of the policy, one trend is in the entire region, we are seeing that policies are heavy on problem identification. Policies are heavy on jargon, but policies are weak in terms of providing the roadmap for action and for solution. Only one exception in the region appears to be the Bangladesh Delta Plan of 2100, where it's a very comprehensive document where you see that how they have identified the problems and how do they want to deal with it. So it appears to be very comprehensive, but one is very intimidated to go all of it through all of it because it's a very, very bulky document. So now with this kind of trend and this kind of the context that I have talked about and the trend, how do we make sense of all of this? Have we responded to climate change, or are we able to respond to climate change as a region in South Asia? Have we created a kind of a vision of a regional policy? My answer would be Well, it can come in bits and pieces. You have a, Indian Mountain Initiative. You have organizations like ICIMOD, which are looking at South Asian region as a whole. You have many other forums. You have donor-driven platform, for example, Indian Himalayas Climate Adaptation Program. So those forums are there. But talking of track one processes, have governments come together to look at a region as a whole? My answer would be no. With few exceptions, yes. But as I said, technically no. Have we been able to create or utilize an existing forum? Answer would be no. We haven't been able to utilize even SARC or looking SARC as umbrella and various forums under it. We have not utilized it to that effectiveness. Have governments been talking on sectoral action plans, climate action plans? So before that, have we acknowledged climate change in the policy discourse? All the South Asian countries, answer is yes. Very upfront. Look at the climate action plan in India. Even we have gone to state action plans. Each state has its own action plan. It has gone down to even districts are talking about climate action planning. Look in Bangladesh, each policy resonates climate change and the impacts of it downstream very strongly. Nepal has done a wonderful job in terms of documenting the climate impacts. Bhutan has it done in terms of they've linked very wonderfully all the economics in climate change. Because for Bhutan, it's a special case that a very small country, very small economy run entirely on hydropower, and therefore that sensitivity is there. And then similar is Pakistan, Afghanistan. Of course, that much of work has not happened. It's a bit marginalized on that policy thinking activism, but yes, some work is happening. As a region, there is acknowledgement, but in terms of whether that is intersecting and connecting with all the countries to tackle it regionally because of the connected geography and connected ecology, I would say no. Come to rivers, and Stellina has already given a wonderful talk on the Indus and just taken us through the entire regime. I would not go deep into the structure of treaties, though that is an area where I spend most of my time. But you see, rivers could be one entry point, or water could be one entry point in terms of visioning a regional or a regional vision for South Asia in terms of climate change and in terms of water resilience. But somehow the way water governance or the river governance or water cooperation, say in a more water or hydropolitical language, the way it exists, entire water cooperation seems to be in silos, fragmented, fractured. Why do I say that? I think it is time now to move beyond much of the celebration of the Indus Treaty and the romanticism with its multi-stroke dispute resolution mechanism that it's created. The treaty, of course, is a wonderful instrument. Two governments religiously believe in it, despite whatever intergovernmental panel talks about. There is a scientific, I would say, scientific, not belief, but a kind of a confidence that the treaty has worked and performed, and the treaty will continue to work given its current phase. But the treaty lacks climate sensitive roadmap to tackle future problems. And as Stellina rightly pointed out, there is a legal space in that treaty to accommodate future cooperation. And therefore, here is an area where India, Pakistan, Afghanistan can look forward to in terms of securing their water futures. Come to this part of the world in South Asia, where Bhutan, Nepal, India, and Bangladesh are strongly interdependent on what comes from Ganges and what comes from Brahmaputra. In terms of India and Nepal, talking of South Asia, you see, this is a very, very connected ecosystem where I am told on ground by villagers that nearly 6,000 rivers trickle down from Nepal to India. And that makes the mighty Ganges that supports the most densely populated region of the world. And therefore, the water cooperation or the water future for India and Nepal has to be dealt with very carefully. What we have each major river system covered with four systems covered with four instruments. And none of those instruments can be said to be water governance instruments. These are merely barrage-centric agreements focused entirely on how to how to manage barrages, how to operate barrages. The intention is not questioned. All of these are well-intended instruments. They were kind of negotiated and brought into force according to the time and needs of those times in 1950s, when whatever the needs were. I think there's high time now for the countries to sit together and look at whether these have performed, and if yes, to what extent, and what are the benefits that have accrued, and what are the possible ways that these could be modified or changed or amended to take care of the future needs, because the water scenario has completely changed in these rivers. So as I said, if cases are filed in the Supreme Court of Nepal on pollution in Ganges, in the Supreme Court of India on the pollution of the same river, and in Bangladesh Supreme Court on the pollution of the same river, that means there is something seriously wrong in the entire basin. And therefore, it is time for countries to reflect in terms of what we have between India and Nepal. So 4 agreements, very skewed, very myopic, limited in scope, do not take care of the basin or the water. These are just barrage-centric agreement. And coming to India and Bhutan, we are focused on hydropower. Time to take care of climate sensitivity, because the silt and the water combination will have some climate effects in Bhutan, which are being studied at the moment. But I think that is going fine for both the countries. But I think the climate factor will be there. India and Bangladesh has tremendous opportunities in terms of addressing climate change and water both, because Bangladesh is entirely dependent. The 54 rivers flow from India to Bangladesh. It is not dependent just for the quantity of entire water that it gets from the catchments in India and the upstream. It is also dependent on the quality of water that it gets. Bangladesh is particularly vulnerable and is a country which looks up to a kind of a strong framework, both legal and institutional, which should take care of environmental needs and climate resilience in Bangladesh in terms of both drought and floods. So as a whole, I would say rivers offer corridors and opportunities for cooperation, but are we as countries and regions in South Asia responding to those needs and circumstances? I think we just begin to do so. The example is that there is a India-Bangladesh Framework Agreement of 2011. So if you track the history from 1972, the kind of instruments we've had with Bangladesh in terms of water cooperation, those have never completely in the past acknowledged the issues of those times in the future. But 2011 agreement is different, is distinct. It's a futuristic agreement. It has all the right words. It talks about basin management. It talks about climate adaptation. It talks about communities. And therefore, that offers a kind of a charter, I would say, because when it says basin, it will not include only India and Bangladesh. It will also include Bhutan, because Brahmaputra basin has China, Bhutan, India, and Bangladesh. When it says climate, it will not only involve the downstream climate, it will also involve climate planning, climate adaptation, and what is done in upstream. So in that context, for example, Eastern Himalayas and the climate adaptation and forest management and the community involvement becomes imperative to what does this agreement can do. Because as I said, thousands of acres of Eastern Himalayas are under community control. And that gives a space for bringing in bottom-up climate adaptation framework or bottom-up water cooperation framework, because here you already have, by law, by constitution, autonomous hill councils as entities which are governing their natural resources, and therefore they can automatically be part of, for example, basin planning or climate planning. I think I'll stop here. I do have a couple of points on 3Ds, kind of a 3-dimensional outlook to what can be done. Maybe briefly, I'll say that in a statement. So my view is, for a start, there can be a 3D outlook to how this should be seen and can be seen by policymakers or by people who are interested in kind of, envisioning or imagining or reimagining, I would say, new policies. So the 3D is, so the deconstruct is very important. So the first D is deconstruct. we need to deconstruct this entire climate jargon, which is not easily understandable by implementers, not understood by normal bureaucrats. For example, the district councils and municipalities, they do not understand the climate jargon in terms of adaptation, finance. We need to deconstruct this to the implementation level. The second D is decentralize. The entire discourse has been centralized completely, whether it is climate change or whether it is transboundary governance. Central governments have been sitting together and calling the shots, and there is very little element of what happens on ground zero, and that's fed into the decision making. Therefore, decentralize or democratize, whichever word is acceptable more to the international fraternity. Then the third D, I would say, desecuritize. We just had the UN Security Council resolution on climate change. This region has seen that trend here. Water is a security issue in many countries in South Asia, and therefore we should revisit and relook how do we desecuritize the entire discourse, entire narrative. There is an element of data security, and data is not easily available. If you go to other forums, there are extensive talks around data and how data should be shared, how it should be in public forums. So desecuritize. So I would say, I would leave you with this, that this three-dimensional outlook to starting reimagining water governance and climate change in South Asia should be the entry point as far as the practice tells us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both of speakers for giving us a wonderful presentation on the impacts of climate change on water governance. Okay, so now let's open the floor for questions. Any questions? Okay, if till someone comes up, I'll just have some questions to both of you. Let's start with Stellina, ma'am. Ma'am, as you said about the river rights and the Indus water treaty, I was just wondering, how could we implement this river rights in this region when we have these political, social, economic differences? For example, in India, when we have this regional religious concept, to provide legal personhood to rivers, whereas the Bangladesh judgment on Turan River, they use the legal principles like public trust doctrine. When we have this much religious differences, how is it possible that we can attribute legal personhood to rivers like Indus Indus rivers, river system?
Thank you, Gayatri. Yes, the rights of river discourse definitely originated from the rights of nature movement. That has taken a very interesting turn in South Asia with two jurisdictions, two judgments, in fact, from India and Bangladesh. Bangladesh judgment actually goes ahead and declaring all rivers in Bangladesh to be illegal persons. Yes, Indian judgment is definitely, as you rightly said, problematic essentially for the rationality which is brought in. Yes, of course, the judgment has brought in the constitutional aspects and the legal personality, but yes, the judgment is completely beset with reference to the religious significance of the rivers. See, if the judgment had stopped with signifying or trying to highlight the religious significance, it would have been just fine. But the problem is that the judgment went ahead and said that in order to protect the religious faith, we need to declare the rivers to be illegal personality. So that becomes problematic in the secular framework of India, as you said. See, it's always important to understand that religion or morality, because religion as a concept brings in the idea of sin, right? So religion can be a really good binding force to suggest the behavioral changes and other aspects to bring in the protective aspects. But the judgment went much ahead and said that, okay, in order to protect the faith, we need to declare. But if you look at even in Bangladesh, Bangladesh also has a sizable number of Hindu populations. So the river Ganges, it's not just revered in India, but practically and de facto speaking, it is worshipped in Bangladesh also. But yes, on a rational basis, the Bangladesh judgment sounds on a very, very robust foundations when it comparison to India. But there, stops the differences or dissimilarities. But in terms of the real challenge the right of rivers faces is in terms of the implementation mechanism. See, ultimately, if we have to rely on a human agency, and both the judgments from Bangladesh and also India has finally given that implementation institutional guardianship to a public entity or a state entity government. When National River Commission in Bangladesh and a host of government officials in these judgments. So whether it is at the transboundary context or whether it is at the domestic context, when the same government who has already been authorized or who has been mandated by the legislative to take care of the pollutions and also the river protection, so if they have been given the same right in order to speak the voice of the rivers, how practically that situations will be different. So for instance, Bangladesh judgment has brought in the concept of public trust doctrine. This doctrine is not only a principle of international environmental law, it's accepted as part of both India's and Bangladesh domestic law. But as per the public trust doctrine, when the state has been considered as a trustee of the natural resources, already the public trust doctrine imposes an obligation on the state to protect the natural resources, right? So unless and until there is an independent voices, where the community participation and the people voices can be heard in that, among the voices or in the voices of the rivers, a government entity that's not going to make any differentiation just because it's declared to be a legal personality. Maybe in terms of semantics or a symbolicism, it may be making a difference. So the real challenge lies in terms of the implementation. So even if I think both Bangladesh and India declares the rivers to be a legal personality, but unless and until there is an independent and also most important transboundary context, the political will to have a collaboration where the community and the bottom-up approach through which the real voices and the interest of the rivers can be discerned, which in the current scenario appears to be bleak. Right? Thank you.
Yeah, it's Namaskar. This is Pradeep Mahapatra. I work with this organization called Udyam, based at Bhubaneswar, Odisha. And it's I think that hearing from Mr. Siddiqui, it is, this is legal perspective and water and it's hydrological, hydrology, politics or geopolitical like this. I think he has elaborated a lot, but I can bring you this is very natural perspective and it's a people's perspective that talks about this even if land, water, forest, life, livelihood and lifestyle, and how nature-based solutions can add value to this community perspective, or this is survival of this entire whole gamut of this, even if it is a Bharat, India, Pakistan, it's Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, even if it's below the down line even. But it is, this is whatever it is that we are discussing on, this is surface water. Do you have any political boundary on this groundwater?
Yes, so rightly pointed out, climate change covers not only surface water, and that was the idea that I did not deliberately take water as the major or the dominant thought for the discussion. So therefore, we were talking of response, cumulatively the response of policies of the climate governance from the region. And therefore, I talked about what is the trend which is emerging broadly. So when we say climate change, so there is, due to time paucity, there is a little space for getting into details. But largely, when we say environmental governance, it includes air, water, land, forest, and groundwater. In terms of, if I can pick up a bit of what you're trying to say, the first question you talked, who owns groundwater? Well, at least following the common law system in all the countries except Bhutan, we know the groundwater, it is a chattel attached to land. So if you own the land, you own groundwater. So private owners, if they own land, they own groundwater. Rest of the land is government land and government owns groundwater. And that's how it's being covered, that there are areas marked by central groundwater authorities as red, orange, yellow and green in terms of availability of groundwater. Take that argument to South Asian level. Well, it's territorial as of now. We are on record not to accept rules of, transboundary aquifers. We are on record not to accept UNWC Water Convention, which talks about where the definition of water course is connected surface in the groundwater. We've not accepted that definition as country, as India, if I'm talking. And impliedly other countries, Nepal and Bangladesh, because they have also not gone ahead and ratified the convention. And therefore, as of now, it is very territorial. Countries own it, individuals own it, governments own it. And you're right, we must talk holistically in terms of climate governance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have one question from Aditya. Aditya, do you want to raise your question orally? You can unmute and ask the questions to the speakers.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. Hello.
Hello, you are audible. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I am from Aurangabad district of South Bihar. I am a PhD scholar at Central University of South Bihar, ma'am. So my question is which is flowing from my South Bihar region. So there is a large heap of sand mining is there in along the national highway. There are many large like mountain sand mining. So there is a eventual loss of livelihood security because when we see the there is a water due to sand mining, water which is used to now water gets settled there, and there is a farmers get difficulty in means compared to earlier, they get difficulty as far as farming is concerned, and due to the big vehicle there is a loss to community also, like street and other. So basically I think that there should be tax system like that, so that panchayats should be empowered to collect tax from the sand mining or who is taking tender like that. So decentralization is but this kind of approach is not incorporated. So sand mining is one aspect which is very, very dangerous in our region, and our sand quality is also best in India, I think. So what should be the framework as far as sand mining is concerned, and the health of and the quality of the water is concerned? Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, Aditya. So, ma'am, adding to the question raised by Aditya on sand mining, tweaking this question from this perspective of legal personhood or rights of the nature, can this be applicable to address these problems the problems of anthropogenic activities that can cause the environmental harm on rivers? In this framework which we are articulating now, can it be used? What do you think?
I don't know, Shawahiq may correct me. I am not very aware of the legal framework governing sand mining, but my presumption is that, when there is before a sand mining particular project, does it comes under EIA? Because illegal sand minings, at least legally, it is prohibited. So I'm not very, very sure, but I think Shawahiq can correct me if I am wrong. I presume that, okay, normally for a sand mining project to take, EIA is important, or without an EIA, sand mining can take place?
No. So see, the framework of sand mining is pretty clear, but before that, I wanted to ask Aditya, you want to empower panchayat and give control to sand mining, or you want to do sustainable sand mining, because the two are very different things. What has been seen in our context is you empower one entity that starts doing all the business. So we are a very complex society. So in any case, so there is a there's a lot of water that has flown down the bridge on sand mining, both in NGT and the Supreme Court, and we have very extensive guidelines by Central Pollution Control Board issued under EP on sand mining. As of now, it continues to be governed basically as a under the collector, the revenue district, as a revenue entity. By and large, yes, it's part of the impact assessment process if it is allowed per se. But then the way it happens is that the patches are allocated, so it is by licensing if it is allowed, and in patches wherever it is prohibited, it is not. But by and large, illegal sand mining goes on. In terms of gross assessment of what is the overall impact of sand mining in for example, say Himalayan rivers, it also varies from rivers to rivers. So for example, sand mining in certain Himalayan rivers is recommended because of the silt that Himalayan rivers bring, but there's no possible way to do that. For example, in North Bihar or in other parts of UP where Himalayas bring a lot of sand mining is the way, and dredging is done in large rivers, for example, in Ganga and Brahmaputra. In order to create waterways, sand mining is done. Dredging is being done to remove silt. But in other parts where sand mining is threatening the flow of rivers, sand mining is threatening groundwater, sand mining is altering the natural ecosystem, because hydrologists seem to suggest that the river, as much as it flows over water, surface water, it does trickle down under the sand, and that's what replenishes groundwater in summer seasons. So sand mining is dangerous. Sand mining, we have been struggling to stop it, but somehow regulatory agencies have not been completely successful. So the first answer is there is a framework. There is a well-evolved framework like any other framework. There is a very extensive guideline and institutional responsibility on sand mining. There are examples in India spread where district officers have gone to an extent to stop sand mining. There's a case of a collector in UP. Then on the other hand, if you are talking South Asia, in Bangladesh, there is a large scale sand mining which is happening along the Meghalaya and Bangladesh border, which seem to benefit a very large construction industry in Bangladesh. So there is not only a sand mining, but a pebble mining and boulder mining and sand mining, which is happening in that area. And all of that is being sent through water, and the construction industry in Bangladesh is booming. So there are various perspectives. It's not one solution that fits all, but then there is a framework that can be looked into. I can see there are very interesting participants in this room, and one of my colleagues from Gujarat, MSH Sheikh, who's a very, I would say, known ground activist on environment and pollution, is also there. And if Gayatri, you may permit, you're the moderator and the chair, I'm sure he would be able to contribute to this topic, because he's the one who's doing a lot of work on sand mining and coastal areas. So if you permit an intervention for a minute, he does have a question, but I think he would
yes, sir. But he has to be brief because we have paucity of time.
Right.
But yeah, and as a part of the think tank and being a fellow, we are really interested to collaborate with academics, practitioners, and surely if we get a chance, could you please share the contact address also, Sheikh? If I'm not wrong, it's Sheikh, how to pronounce it. Yeah, if you could share it with us, then we can look for future collaborations as well. Hello, can you hear me?
You are mute.
We cannot hear you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. As far as the sand mining is concerned in South Gujarat, especially in the coastal area, a lot of mechanized sand harvesting is done by the dredger kind of equipments illegally. as per the known things in CRZ area and coastal area, the sand mining is prohibited. But illegalities has been going on in large area. Whether by hand manual methods, a local fisherman community or local community are permitted to take sand from by traditional means from the river and coastal area. So in the name of getting lease by manual things, all the industrial people and all the big companies are harvesting the sand from the coastal areas. This is happening. One biggest river, Tapi River, is flowing. You can see that the sand mafias has taken the lease, and after removing a fine sand and taking back it in construction industries, most of the gravel, around about 40%, they dump on the riverbed, riverside. So if you see a satellite image of the river, you will find that everywhere at the bank, the river has some kind of fingers. And the fingers are that the river, the sand mafias take the sand from the mid of the river and dump the gravel and dump the stones and unwanted materials on the bank of the river. So the river, if we go and see, we can't see the river, but you can see the devastated banks of the river, which is very ugly scene of the river. So, and sand mafia, it is known that politicians, local bureaucrats are also not in position to talk about this, because they are the local peoples and they have some powerful lobby. If any officer is also putting pressure or putting some kind of control over them, they change the officer, or they make allegation against the officer, or they even kill the officer. Because what is happening, our mining department is getting more revenue from the illegal minings than the legitimate mines. So this is the scale where we can say the sand mafias are working in South Gujarat and Gujarat. So very bad situation for the sand mining in South Gujarat. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your inputs. Thank you for all participants to raise the question. Actually, we have a lot of questions. I personally have some questions to Siddiqui sir regarding the practitioner's perspective, but unfortunately, due to the time limit, we have to wind up. But we look forward for organizing further talks on this topic, because as everyone, Alex, Stellina ma'am, and Siddiqui sir said, climate change is very important topic to be discussed from water perspective. So I hope we will organize one more public forum in future, and we can continue these discussions later.
Let's deconstruct the discourse. That's the first D. You know, so
yes, sir.
If you deconstruct it into, you know, focused areas, and probably we will engage sharply. And it was, I think this was a wonderful one.
Yes. Thank you, both of you, for kindly accepting our invitation and being a part of this forum. So over to Alex for the formal conclusion.
So yeah, first of all, if any of you who've joined us today are not yet familiar overall with Global Research Network, then it is my great honor and joy to say, check it out, consider maybe becoming a member, engaging with us, or not becoming a member, and just engaging with us if you have ideas, if you have contributions, if you want to start dialogues. We are the forum to do this. Let me say thank you, first of all, to the GRN and all the people behind the scenes of this organization, especially the creative director, Preeti Tuck, who helped us establish the stream today and took some time to be with us today to make sure everything works fantastically. Let me thank Gayatri for organizing this amazing session. A huge thanks to Dr. Jolie and Mr. Siddiqui for giving us such profound insight, but also for being two very, very aspiring people. And, you know, just through your work, creating also what I think, and this is very important, hope, right? That not all is lost, that we can do things, that we can together, also with the communities and the people, create a better future. And finally, let me thank all you who joined us today on YouTube and here on in the session on Zoom, for listening, for thinking together with us, for asking questions, for comments, and for hopefully continuing these conversations, both as conversations, but also into practice. So thank you very much to all of you. You know, see you hopefully all next time. Stay safe, stay comfy. Goodbye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.